I'd like to introduce our guests, starting with Jared Bowen, our guide through this insightful conversation, a true champion of the arts. Many of you know Jared from his daily radio show, The Culture Show, on GBH, where he's also an Emmy Award-winning executive arts editor. Jared also brings his talent for sparking engaging conversations with everyone from world leaders to Oscar-winning actors at the Boston Speakers Series. We are lucky to have Jared with us today to lead this conversation. Jared Bowen. Now, to someone who deeply understands the power of collaboration in arts and culture, it's Jim Canales. Jim is the president and trustee of the Barr Foundation, one of Boston's leading philanthropic organizations that supports so many things, including arts and creativity, climate and education. He is an incredible philanthropic leader. We are lucky to have him here in the state, someone that I look up to. So happy to have Jim here with us. Jim. Up next in our panel is Jean Mineo. You saw her on the video. Jean's the driving force behind the Bellforge Arts Center, a fantastic space for artists and creativity in Medfield. Jean is a boots-on-the-ground artist pioneer. She's passionate about making arts accessible and engaging for everyone, no matter their background. Jean Mineo. So, Jared, I will turn this over to you.
But you didn't introduce our fourth panelist, Jay Kim, of course, is going to join us on the panel as well. And I just want to say, I know I speak for all of us in being so grateful for Jay's leadership of this institution, especially at this moment in time in its evolution. So, Jay, thank you for your leadership so much.
Well, as Jay mentioned at the outset, this conversation is about why the arts. And again, making the distinction that while we enjoy the arts, they uplift us, they bring joy, they also are vital to our society in the way that they show us who we are, the way that they offer means of expression for people who can't necessarily communicate in other straightforward ways. They're an economic engine. We've seen the transformation of cities and towns throughout New England, not to mention the rest of the United States, through the arts and the concentration of arts in education and in vital downtown corridors. So again, this conversation today will be quick, it'll be robust, it'll be meaty to understand why this is such a vital sector for us. And I'll just begin quickly by saying what I have seen. I've been covering the arts in addition to news for the better part of 2 decades now. And I think that we are in a moment in this region where we're seeing how people are embracing the arts and understanding the value of the arts in a way I have never seen before. So this is such an extraordinary and exciting moment, and I am very honored to be here to be part of this conversation. So the first part will be very formal. I have one question for each of our guests to start us off, and then we'll just launch into a conversation, no holds barred. So, Jim, let me start with you. Sure. Why the arts? There are so many needs. We understand transportation needs in this region. We understand housing needs, education needs. But the Barr Foundation is now devoting $30 million a year to the arts. Why?
So great question, and a really important question. And I'm so heartened to be in a room where the Community Foundation has made the decision for this annual meeting to focus on the power of arts and culture. And I think it speaks to Jared's point about what we are seeing in communities across the Commonwealth in terms of their understanding of the vitality and the centrality of arts and culture, especially in this moment in time where polarization, division, inability to understand and engage with one another is so very present. And the arts can play that role. And I think, as Sonali said so beautifully, to allow us to see the humanity in one another. So certainly from a value standpoint, that's what motivates us at the Barr Foundation. But I want to say a couple of other things. Jared mentioned the economic role of the arts, the economic engine that it is. And let me give you 3 data points that I think are interesting from 2022. In the Commonwealth, $28.6 billion of economic activity was a result of arts and culture within the Commonwealth in 2022. Second data point is 133,000 jobs existed because of arts and culture in the Commonwealth. And the third is 4.1% of all economic activity was arts and culture, which is second only to retail and ahead of construction. And I offer those data points because oftentimes they get cited as why the arts is important. It's an economic engine. It helps to create jobs. And that is important, but that's not the only reason. To me, that is kind of an instrumental role for the arts. It uses the arts as an instrument. Arts allows economic activity to occur. But we also need to focus on the intrinsic value of the arts. It's not just about the arts being an instrument for other aims. It's about the arts doing all the things that have been described so beautifully by many others today in terms of connecting us, helping us to see things in new ways, helping to support creative expression, helping different voices and perspectives to be part of the dialogue. That's what really motivates us at the Barr Foundation and the work that we do. It's why the arts are equal to the other areas of climate and education in our grant making. And it's why we're so proud to be a partner with the Community Foundation.
Jay, I'll bounce down to you. The arts are the thing that are frequently cut. They're cut out of education. They're taken less seriously by other entities. People don't necessarily rush to them. But this foundation, your foundation, has made the arts a cornerstone since inception. Why?
I think Jim captured it beautifully in terms of the reasons, right? I mean, obviously the economic impact is a part of it, but I think it is that intrinsic value that arts and culture brings. And I think at the Community Foundation for MetroWest, right, part of why we exist is to improve the lives of everyone, right? It's to have a vibrant community. And you cannot do that, in our view, without having that really vibrant and amazing arts community, having those enriching cultural events. And so, our founders and then our staff members, our board members, everyone who have been a part of this organization have embraced that and understand that, if you do not have those things in place, we can't improve the lives of everyone. We can't succeed in our mission without having that as a focus.
Jean, it's already been used, a phrase already used with you a couple times, boots on the ground. You're the doer, bringing arts to the forward. It's always my fortune that I'm just the conveyor. I get to take the great work that people like you are doing and put it before the public, who then we're already finding on the Culture Show is so active to participate. It would be my hope, it was my hope on the Culture Show that people would learn and be engaged, but they are already moved, literally moving, getting in their cars and participating and going to places. What's the purpose of Bellforge and the role you see that you're creating for your community?
Thanks, Jared. It's, it did start out with this idea that I mentioned in the video about increasing collaboration among different organizations within a community or a region, in fact, and I think we've been fairly successful at doing that. But the why comes down to actually being on the campus and engaging a community in the programming itself. And when you see that happen intergenerationally and, nobody has their face in a phone, there's something magical that can happen when people are together experiencing something culturally.
Right, so that, again, was the formal part. So let's just dive in. To connect some of the dots, and again, people I think sometimes silo the arts, but what are the evident needs in the community as you see it? Jay, you alluded to the tough times that we are in. I certainly don't need to repeat it, that the arts can address some of the things that we don't necessarily think of the arts being able to address. Go ahead, Jay.
Oh.
Okay. I can just give you an example. We did a program coming out of the pandemic with high school students, and it was a collaboration with Medfield Outreach in our community, and we wound up doing a public art installation on this campus. And some of the responses from the kids after the fact were they said things like, I was creative in ways I didn't know I could be. Somebody else said, I realized that I could make a difference, and things like, it just was very powerful, and that's just one arts experience. And if they can take that life lesson, and apply it anywhere else in their life, that's real agency and empowerment. And again, it's just through one arts experience.
I think what we're seeing as well, think about our Surgeon General here in the United States, Vivek Murthy, who's written a book about loneliness. And I think when we think about the epidemic of loneliness in this society, which the pandemic only exacerbated, of course, and we think about the point that you made of people being in their phones all the time, and while in theory social media is connecting you to people, it's not doing it in the way that we are humanly connected here today. And so the notion of how the arts plays a role to counteract that epidemic of loneliness, to think about Jean's example about the power and the dynamism that occurs when people are engaging with you, reminds us of another point that's important. We often think about the arts as a passive activity. We think about arts as being something, we go to a museum, we see something. We go to performing arts, we sit in a seat from 8 to 10 and we watch a performance. But what Jean's describing is the equally important role of the arts, which is we are all engaging in the arts. When we dance, we engage in the arts. When we draw, we engage in the arts. We are active participants in the arts, and you don't need to be an arts professional to be an artist. And I think that's a really fundamental point as you think about this point about arts engagement, as you think about how we can use it to counteract loneliness. We are seeing examples in other countries where doctors are prescribing the ability to go to an arts performance as part of addressing a mental health challenge. So I think there's just a lot that we can learn about the powerful role that the arts can play.
I just want to make the connection to education as an example, right? So there are a lot of studies that show that when you have arts and culture programming in schools and such, educational outcomes improve, you know, and I think, and I talk a lot about this, you know, in other settings, but, you know, we have a lot of challenges in some communities here in MetroWest. As an example, third grade reading, you know, proficiency test scores, right? If you can't read by third grade, you know, you're going to have real challenges in life. But we have communities here in the MetroWest that have, you know, third grade reading proficiency test scores lower than Boston. You know, Framingham, Milford, Marlborough, Waltham as an example. So I think there's real incredible benefits, right? When you can bring, like Discovery Museum in the video, when you're able to bring that into schools, educational outcomes can change.
One of the things that's always struck me is that when people participate in the arts, especially if it's an art class in school, or you're going to one of your programs, those students will then take that experience home. So it's not a single experience that happens, because then they share it with their siblings who maybe want to participate, who maybe want to do better, you know, beat them at their siblings' game, or they draw on their parents. And the parents see the arts or learn about the arts in ways that they hadn't experienced before, because as I often have recognized through my own nieces and nephews, I'm supposed to be the art critic, and they're the ones who see things I've never seen in pieces, but they bring it home and it changes the dynamic. That's a kind of question.
Agreed.
Yeah. But you must, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, but the one thing when you talked about coming home and when I thought about this beautiful performance that we watched today, we also are reminded about the intergenerational role and the value of engaging multiple generations, the value of transmission of culture. I think it's such a powerful example.
I was just going to say, to your point, Jim, about other countries that prescribe arts experiences, I read recently an amazing book called Your Brain on Art, which is the neuroscience of what happens to your body and your brain when you engage in arts. The arts can literally help you live longer. If you engage just a couple of times a year, you lower your early mortality risk by 14%. If you engage a couple of times, you know, every couple of months, that number goes to 31%. I mean, why aren't we doing this everywhere?
This is why Jared's going to live to 114.
Yay.
Well, one of the great things that happened after COVID during COVID, was people who were being released from the hospitals in Boston were then sent to the convention center. And they were given daily regimens of art, because artists, musicians were recording themselves performing. They would be placed onto an iPad, and then they had daily regimens of morning music to get you roused and up, a noontime regimen to keep your day going, and then something to calm your nerves, again, understanding the science of this, to help you sleep at night. And that was fully baked into the therapy regimen for people who were well enough to leave the hospital but couldn't quite go home yet. So we're understanding this more. How do you begin to identify and help build the arts infrastructure so that it can address those needs? Where do the foundations come in this regard?
Do you want to start, Jim?
Well, I think, first of all, we're lucky to have Barr Foundation choose us as one of the community foundations to be a part of this Creative Commonwealth initiative. And this is truly a transformative partnership. It's 8 community foundations across the state with support from the Barr Foundation. And it's really about how do we strengthen the arts ecosystem? How do we make sure that arts and culture, can be vibrant across the entire state? And so, for us, we have limited resources, right? I mean, we've granted out, as the video showed, $3 million over the course of our existence, but it's not enough. And we need more resources. We need more people to join us and others to bring more arts and culture to our community. And so that's a little bit about what today's about as well. It's trying to make sure that everybody understands the power of arts and culture and the role that we play. So part of this initiative is we have to kind of figure out some things like what's the plan? How are we going to continue to boost and lift up arts and culture in this community? And so a little bit of a TBD on that, but it's something that we are actively working on, and again, would love all of your support.
I just want to build on a word that Jay used about ecosystem, and I think it's something that we think about a lot at the Barr Foundation with our funding in the arts, which is how do we think about the broad range of entities that play a role to support the dynamism of arts and culture in the Commonwealth. And I'll just say a word about the Creative Commonwealth Initiative, and I want to thank San Wang, who's the director of our arts program and has been such a leader and visionary in this work in the 10 years that I've been here, and she preceded me, so she's been here close to 11. And I think that the Creative Commonwealth Initiative is a great example of one of the ways we think about our role, which is, of course, we're a direct grant maker. We make grants to nonprofit organizations in the arts to do the terrific work that they do in community. But the Creative Commonwealth Initiative is an example of our making investments in community foundations, as Jay said, 8 community foundations across Massachusetts, to play a civic leadership role in helping to elevate and amplify arts work, obviously in those local communities. But just as importantly, helping to motivate and draw in new donors to see the arts as something that's important to the culture of the community, helping to have the community foundations play an important convening and communications and policy-making role in terms of the ways that they engage in their communities. So really it's a multifaceted initiative that looks at just beyond making individual grants and thinks about how do we build more capacity around the state to do this kind of work in multiple regions.
Jean, you were sharing with me this morning a way that the Barr Foundation had a tremendous impact on you and an opportunity you never would have had before, and it was kind of a game changer for you. Would you share that so we can understand how this effort, this investment transforms?
Sure. It's called Creative Community Fellows, and it used to be a national program, but there was a New England cohort established in 2018, and I was fortunate enough to be selected for that cohort. Now, artist residency programs exist around the world for artists, but rarely do they exist for arts administrators. And we
should explain that artist residencies are, their travel is paid for, their housing is paid for, everything is paid for, so they can just go think,
just go make their art, right? So to be a part of that cohort, both with artists and other administrators, was a real incredible opportunity, but it also established a network and a cohort across New England, which is really small. I still connect with the people that I met there, and we still engage on a regular basis. So that was a game changer for me as an arts manager. And for the Community Foundation, we were an all-volunteer organization for years, and you guys stepped in early with program support so that we could get our feet under us and actually start to test what we thought we could do, to the point where in our first 2 seasons now, with having some staff, we've attracted over 17,000 people from 25 states and 380 Massachusetts zip codes. But it started because of seed funding from the Community Foundation. Really incredible.
How do we start to move away from the intimidation factor? I think this is another part of the arts. This is, again, part of what I try to do every day on the show is, and I'm somebody who did not grow up in a culturally literate family at all, didn't go to museums, didn't go to theater, I think it's the power of the arts that it pulled this out of me, and now I get to cover it and share other people's stories. But I still find many people thinking the arts as elitist, Maybe because so much of them takes place, if you go to Boston, in gilded halls and fancy places, or they're intimidated that I don't belong in these spaces. How do we begin to change this? Because this brings us back to the core of how it can be a core of our society.
I'm happy to speak less wearing my Barr Foundation hat and more wearing my hat as a trustee of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, indeed one of those gilded institutions in Boston. And I think we think about this a lot. How do you make a place feel welcoming? How do you make a place feel that you are included and that you have something to offer us as much as we have something to offer you? And I would say for us, without getting into all the tactics and strategies, I think one of the key things, and this is relevant, I think, for many of us in this room who serve on boards, I actually think it is the boards of these institutions that have to play a vital leadership role in both prompting these conversations and then being part of the difficult changes that some of these conversations may bring about. And one of the things I'm proud about at the Gardner Museum is that the board is deeply engaged in these discussions and really grappling with some of the trade-offs and challenges that are inherent in doing this work. And so if we want our institutions to be inclusive, if we want our institutions to reach deeply into community, and we often all talk about that, there are a lot of things that we need to do differently in order to do that effectively. And it requires not just staff thinking about it, it requires the board leaning into that work as well.
And resources, of course. And I think when we talk to Jean and other incredible, arts and culture leaders in the region, we did hear, we want to make it more accessible, right? But sometimes that unfortunately, it takes money. It takes resources to be able to develop the programming or to do the outreach or to make it more accessible, right? So that is something that, we have focused on with our funding is trying to help organizations kind of fulfill that desire, but it does take resources.
Jean, you mentioned 17,000 people are coming to you.
In warm weather only. When it's not raining.
It didn't just happen. How did you get the people to come? Invite them in, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a ton of work, but for the most part, all of our programming is free. We're also working in collaboration, for example, with our food cupboard to provide meal tickets for their constituency in order to make it easy for everybody to come. Last year, 51% of our performers were performers of color in a community that's 95% white. We are trying to bring in the diversity and the representation because I think, and we've heard this from people in the community, when they see themselves represented, there's a validation there that they're not seeing elsewhere.
This is a key part of this. And Jay, you and I have spoken about this. I know belonging is huge for you. How do you begin to, and how have you been moving toward that, especially with the arts as a vessel?
I think, the bridging divides piece of it, I think, is important to talk about, right? And when we talk about demographics and the changing demographics, I'll give you I'm a data guy, Cecily, as you know. So we have about 700,000 residents in the MetroWest region. So 20% of the residents are foreign born, 20%. About 25% speak a foreign language at home, right? So that tells you there is a growing diversity. There are more people of color. There are people from different backgrounds and cultures. And I think there is a real power that arts and culture has to bridge those divides, to bring people together from different backgrounds, to get to experience what we did today, from Chandika. That really helps to, I think, move us closer together again in a time when things are so divisive.
Jared, I just want to ask you a question, if I might, if you don't mind, because you said something in your introductory comments that I thought was really powerful, which was, given obviously the years that you've observed the arts scene here, that you feel like we're in a particular moment, that you're seeing something that just feels very different. And I'm wondering if you could unpack that for us a little bit, because there's a lot in that I think is germane to this conversation.
Well, I think the arts change every single day. This is the joy of doing my job, is it's never the same. And the arts are completely reflective of society. Yes, we'll always have the Mamma Mia musicals and the blockbuster Picasso shows, but of course Picasso was very much reflecting war and conflict and the traumas of his time. But this always comes to the fore, and the artists, I think, are the people who are out in front talking about this. You're seeing their music telling stories in music halls. I'm thinking, the reason I'm hesitating is because I was thinking of Jeremy Eichler's book. He's a Boston Globe classical music critic, and he just wrote a book about I think it was the 5 composers who, coming out of World War II and understanding what happened with the Holocaust, how they began to process it in music. So we see it there. We see how photographers are representing the protests and war and death and conflict in our time on museum walls. And this is why I do the show, because I want people to understand that, yes, when you go into the Museum of Fine Arts, it might seem intimidating at first, but when you go and you see those pictures on the walls that are made by people like you and me and our friends and family and the people that we all know, their stories, they might not be entirely our stories, but they are our stories too. They're certainly reflective of our times. And I think the other component of this is that we're starting to see a change in leadership in the region, where people are looking at things quite differently. And people, as I've always joked, people don't necessarily play well together in the sandbox in terms of artistic leaders, because often the arts aren't well funded, and artists are artists and they're not necessarily business minded. So they get very protective of their entities. But when you play well together in the sandbox, you realize that there are sharing elements that you can have. And if you come together, there are ways that you can be really unified, and that the BSO can have the same turf as a smaller art gallery, and there's a way to actually bring one into the other. And I see that happening for the first time. And I think I also understand that people are talking about the arts differently for the first time, and you see more younger people aware and wanting to create, and frankly, technology. Now I'm filibustering, I feel like. But technology has a huge hand in this too, because everybody has a camera, so everybody is a photographer, everybody can make videos, everybody can tell their stories, everybody can be a performer and lift up their voice, and that has just made everything more democratic.
You can see why I asked him the question. I don't want to use this wisdom, and I just want to take a moment to say that, you know, what Jared does is such a gift to this community. The stories that he uplifts, the leaders and non-leaders and other folks in the community who are able to talk about the work that they do with such passion and such clarity. It's really a gift to all of us, and I just want to thank you for what you do for this community, Jared.
As we talk about diversity too, how does that factor into how it can be brought into what the foundations are doing, and that there can be motivation there? As I say, the artists are already underway, they're already doing it. You know, people often looked at Open Studio or the culture shows. Your show is incredibly diverse. It's not me, it's the artists, again, who are telling stories that resonate with other people. So how do you start to bring accountability for diversity and make that push?
I think that's critical. I mean, I'll just say that for the Barr Foundation, with one of our core values being to center racial equity, this is something that has been at the core of the work that we have been doing in the Arts and Creativity program, as well as across other areas of our work under Sansan and Sue Ellen's leadership and engagement. And when you look at the grants that we make, you look at the initiatives that we have, we are very much looking carefully at how is it that we are ensuring that these resources are touching the broad range of that ecosystem of arts organizations, from the smallest organizations to perhaps some of the largest organizations, and even in some of the small organizations, to acknowledge the role that philanthropy has played at times in actually under-resourcing a set of institutions. And so part of what we are trying to do, we're not going to be able to rectify all of the under-resourcing that has occurred over decades. But what we can do is, with our own resources, think about how we invest in a truly significant way in institutions that really need to go to a different level of scale to have the different impact that they can have if they are resourced properly. So you will see that as a theme throughout the work that we do. And I would say, again, in our work with the community foundations, clearly, part of what we are trying to do is figure out how we can bring new resources to the arts and to understanding the value and the necessity of a vibrant arts and culture community.
Gene, I want to, or Jay, do you?
Oh, I was just going to say that I think we also have to come at this with a lot of humility. And I think as a philanthropic organization, we have to do a lot more listening. And that is something we are planning to do over the next 6 months to a year as part of this initiative. But we need to listen to Jean, we need to listen to the incredible nonprofit organizations here, and we need to understand, how can we be a partner, right? And when we're talking about uplifting and looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what have you, I think the first thing we have to do is listen.
And I was going to jump off of listening, and also another reason I feel like we're in a different moment is because you see Governor Healy making the arts a priority in her administration, to the extent that she told me she wants to begin embedding artists into different state agencies, listening to what the artists have to say, because artists usually aren't in the room where it can happen. We have Mayor Wu in Boston has a free museum admission pilot underway right now for all Boston public school students, where they can go to a series of museums, I think it's 5 or 6, I think, in the Boston area for free for the first 2 Sundays of every single month. That'll wrap up soon, but I think we're already seeing signs that it can continue. But Jean, we were talking earlier as well about having artists in the room where they aren't usually heard. How do you see that expanding, and how have you been able to use that?
Yeah, I also wanted to, as the boots on the ground, say we don't make assumptions about what those needs are in the community. So your point about listening, we actually have a part-time staff person. Her entire job is to go to other communities, speak with other kinds of agencies, figure out what are the needs, the most pressing needs, and how might we help fill some of those, the things that are missing in our communities and our region. But to your question about artists, specifically, I think I'm the only one here trained as a visual artist with a fine arts degree. It's extremely rigorous, and artists are taught observation, communication, and experimentation. And I think for so many of these big issues that we're wrestling with, whether it's climate or housing or health disparities, we really need a reimagining. And I think to have artists at the table who can engage in that way can only get us to a better place.
Curious is from the foundations, as you look at what you're doing, where you see other moments of success and spots of success across the country where this is working.
Well, first though, let me start with a slight negative, if I might, and it really starts with where you started the conversation, which is the one thing that I do see that is troubling to me, and I think probably troubling to my arts colleagues, is I have seen a number of national and regional funders step back from the arts. And I think the point that Jay made in his comments about people seeing the arts as a nice to have, and I think with all the pressing needs that we see before us, I worry about the sense that, we've got to focus on housing, or we've got to focus on economic development. Those are very important things to focus on, absolutely. But this notion that somehow the arts and culture sector are not as important, or as we're making those trade-offs, that somehow it sort of falls down the list, is something that is, I think, a trend that we in our work are trying to elevate the role of the arts and point out why it is so fundamental when you're thinking about being a philanthropist, engaging in a region, investing in community, and trying to drive the kind of vibrancy that we want in all of our communities and the kind of inclusion and belonging that we want. The arts has to be a centerpiece of that work, in my view.
Well, I'm getting the rap signal, which in my world would be the equivalent of Jim Browdy staring through the studio glass at me. So let's just end on a really positive note. We'll quickly go down the line. Jay, I'll start with you. And what to you will be the first glimmer of success as this investment continues, gets underway, and we see the arts and culture really taking hold in our communities?
I think it's collaboration, and I think what I would point out actually today is that Bellforge and AIC are right in the midst of a collaboration, and I think we have to see more of that. And so I hope that the role that we can play as a convener, as a community foundation, that we start to see a lot more collaboration exist.
I guess I hope some of the takeaways are that you all find the value of arts and culture, not only for yourself and your families, but for your community and the region. And I hope we ask, what if? And we lean into why not? Let's do this.
And I think for us at Barr, we talk about our role as being both stewards and catalysts. And I think in this Community Foundation's initiative, Creative Commonwealth Initiative, it's really been about playing a catalytic role. And so for us, success would be that we would come back here in 5 years and see that the Community Foundation has really stepped into this leadership role for arts and culture, that $3 million figure over the last 30 years, which is certainly impressive, is something that can really be expanded and grown in the next 5 years. And that's part of what we're excited to be a part of.
Well, I would say the most exciting part for me is all the listening that you have done to see this room filled with people curious about how to move this forward. Thank you for being here. Thanks to our panelists.
Thank you, Jared.